Welcome to Sharp Angle. Today we're looking into a story that puts presidential power, public safety, and the American idea of federalism on a collision course. The Trump administration is preparing a plan to deploy National Guard troops to Chicago despite the city's mayor and Illinois governor saying they do not want them and do not need them. Pentagon planners have been sketching out options, while the White House frames this as a crackdown on crime. Local leaders call it unconstitutional and unnecessary, and Democrats in Congress say the president is manufacturing a crisis. So, what actually happened? What's legal, and what does this mean for ordinary Americans? Let's start with what's new and specific. Over the weekend, reporting out of Washington said the Pentagon has been planning for a possible National Guard deployment to Chicago. On Sunday, Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries said flatly that the president has no basis to send federal troops into the city. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker and Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson called the idea an abuse of power. At the same time, National Guard units already patrolling Washington, D.C., were authorized to begin carrying sidearms and rifles, a sign of how far the administration is willing to go in its domestic law and order push. In short, in D.C., the troops are already on the street. In Chicago, the administration is signaling it wants to make that step next. Important clarification. As of today, there is no confirmed order that puts Guard units on Chicago's streets. What exists is a set of plans at the Pentagon, a lot of public signaling from the White House, and a unified wall of opposition from Illinois officials. That matters because the legal rules change dramatically depending on who gives the order, and under what authority. Now the data check that cuts through the rhetoric. Chicago's violent crime has been falling this year. Through the first half of 2025, homicides and shootings were down by roughly a third compared with 2024, and the police department reports multi-year lows across several categories. That doesn't mean Chicago is safe. It means the trend line contradicts the narrative of a city in sudden collapse. Baltimore, which the White House has also threatened to target, is seeing the fewest homicides in decades. If the sales pitch is that military deployment is needed because crime is spiraling upward, the numbers do not back that up. So if the numbers are improving, why Chicago? 3 reasons. First, politics. Chicago is a large Democratic lead city that plays well with a national get tough message. Second, media optics. Images of troops on big city streets dominate the news cycle and set the agenda. Third, immigration. The administration has linked its urban crime narrative to sanctuary city policies, arguing that federal support and harsher enforcement are needed in places that limit cooperation with immigration authorities. All 3 threads let the White House argue it's restoring order while painting local leaders as weak. Here's the short legal primer in plain English. The National Guard can operate in 3 basic modes. Mode 1, state status. The governor is the commander-in-chief, and Guard members can support local policing as needed under state law. Mode 2, Title 32 status. Troops remain under the governor but are federally funded. They can support law enforcement but are not federal troops. Mode 3, Title 10 federal status, also called federalization, where the president takes command. In Title 10, the Posse Comitatus Act generally bars federal troops from direct law enforcement, unless Congress has given explicit permission. That explicit permission is usually the Insurrection Act. It's the legal off-ramp that lets a president use federal troops for domestic law enforcement in extreme cases. Rebellion, obstruction of federal law, or when a state cannot or will not protect constitutional rights. Presidents have used it sparingly. Eisenhower in Little Rock, Kennedy in Alabama and Mississippi, George H.W. Bush during the 1992 Los Angeles unrest. If the White House wants to put federally controlled Guard in Chicago without the governor's consent, the Insurrection Act is the cleanest and most explosive route. Could the administration avoid the Insurrection Act? Possibly, but it gets messy. The president can ask friendly governors to send their Guard units under Title 32 to support federal agencies. Think logistics, transport, surveillance while keeping those units under state command. That's how troops have been moved around for border and D.C. missions, but shipping in other states. Guard into Illinois without Illinois consent would trigger lawsuits the minute boots hit the ground. Another Levitan USC, Section 12406, a president call up state Guard forces to enforce federal law in cases of invasion or rebellion. Using that to police street crime in Chicago would be uncharted territory and almost guaranteed to end up in court. Why should ordinary Americans care about these legal footnotes? Because they set the precedent for every future crisis, real or political. If a president can unilaterally drop troops into any city that doesn't align with Washington's agenda, the balance between states and the federal government tilts hard toward the White House. That affects labor strikes, protests, immigration crackdowns, even local elections and school policy fights. Once a power is normalized, it tends to be used more often, not less. If a Chicago deployment did happen, what would it look like on the ground? Expect Guard units staged at transportation hubs, federal buildings, and key intersections, vehicle checkpoints around designated security zones, and a support role for ICE or other federal agencies if the mission is tied to immigration enforcement. The Guard's public posture would stress support to civil authorities. But the lived experience for residents would be more uniforms, more rifles, more barriers, and more confusion about who's actually in charge on any given corner. Would it make Chicago safer? That depends on the mission. The Guard is trained for emergencies and civil support, not routine urban policing. When soldiers are asked to do police work, to risk spike, escalation during tense street encounters, and mission creep, what starts as perimeter security turns into arrests. There's also the crowd dynamic. A visible military presence can deter some crimes while provoking larger protests, which then become the justification to keep troops in place. The safety payoff is uncertain. The political payoff is immediate. The costs, financially, moving troops, housing them, feeding them, paying per diem, and overtime, none of that is cheap. Whether the bill lands with the Pentagon or the state, taxpayers pay it. Operationally, Guard members are your neighbors, nurses, mechanics, teachers pulled away from families and civilian jobs. Politically, the social trust cost is the biggest. Every day of military presence on city streets erodes the line Americans are used to seeing between policing and war. Let's go deeper on the crime trend, because it matters. Chicago still has serious violence, but 2025 has looked different from the peak pandemic years. Homicides, non-fatal shootings, carjackings, robberies, most of the major indicators, are down double digits year over year. City officials say the combination of targeted policing, community violence intervention, and better case clearances is finally paying off. None of that is a victory lap, it is context. If you're going to send troops into an American city, the bar should be higher than it makes for a strong news clip. Politically, both parties see opportunity. For the White House, Chicago is a stage to argue that Democrats can't keep cities safe and that only federal power can restore order. For Democrats, the plan is a gift-wrapped example of executive overreach, a president willing to trample states' rights and local democracy for a culture war headline. In swing suburbs, the question becomes which risk bothers voters more, crime on the evening news, or soldiers at the train station. Internationally, the optics are not great. Allies see Guard patrols in the nation's capital and threats to send troops to blue cities and wonder about the stability of American democracy heading into another election season. Adversaries push the narrative that the United States lectures the world on liberty while militarizing its own streets. Credibility isn't just about tanks and treaties. It's about whether the United States looks like it trusts its own institutions. Here's what to watch in the coming days. 1. Paperwork. If the administration is serious, you'll see formal orders or legal memos invoking specific statutes. 2. The courts. Illinois Attorney General will move for an injunction within hours of any federal order. 3. Rules of engagement. If the Guard is deployed, are they armed, and with what? Pistols only, or rifles too? 4. Mission statement. Is the task limited to protecting federal facilities, or is it framed as citywide crime suppression? 5. Duration and exit criteria. Without clear endpoints, temporary deployments become the new normal. There are 3 realistic scenarios. From here, Scenario 1. Political show of force without follow-through. The White House squeezes maximum headlines, but legal risk and unified state opposition keep troops out of Chicago. Scenario 2. A limited facilities protection mission, under a legally narrow authority Guard staged around federal buildings and transit hubs, armed but not making arrests. That still triggers lawsuits but might survive the week-to-week news cycle. Scenario 3. Full-scale confrontation under the Insurrection Act. That means federalized Guard, possible active duty support, and a constitutional knife fight. That goes to the Supreme Court. Scenario 3 would redefine the presidency for years. What does all this mean for ordinary Americans outside Chicago? 3 takeaways. First, precedent. If a president can do this to a city you don't live in, a president you do like could do it to your city next time. Second, pocketbook. These deployments cost real money, while cities are already fighting for federal dollars for schools, transit, and public health. Third, power. Every expansion of federal muscle at home makes it easier to use that muscle again during strikes, protests, or immigration raids, especially against communities with the least political clout. If you are in a city that sees a deployment, here's the calm, practical advice. Know your rights. You can film from public spaces, you can ask whether an officer is local police or Guard, and you can ask under what authority they're operating. Keep interactions respectful and brief. If you run a business, post clear hours and access points so customers can get past checkpoints without drama. If you're a parent, talk to your kids about what to do if they see a checkpoint or a protest. Planning beats panic. History helps here. When presidents used the Insurrection Act in the Civil Rights era, it was to enforce constitutional rights that states were denying black students entering schools. Citizens' right to vote. The 1992 Los Angeles case came at a moment of acute unrest when state and local authorities asked for help. Those episodes were messy, but the legal justifications were clear and urgent. Stretching the same laws to police a city where crime is trending down is a very different argument, and one the courts will scrutinize. Another thread to watch is immigration. The administration has hinted that guard deployments in big cities would also support federal immigration enforcement. In practice, that could mean staging troops near transit hubs while ICE runs operations nearby. Even if guard members aren't making arrests, the optics blur the line between soldier and officer. For mixed status families and immigrant communities, that raises the fear temperature without necessarily improving safety. For businesses, the risk is whiplash. If you operate downtown, soldiers and barricades might calm flash mob theft or deter assaults near your doorway. They might also scare customers, trigger protests on your block, and jack up insurance questions you didn't have last week. If you're hiring, good luck convincing candidates that a militarized central business district is a stable place to build a career. Investors notice these signals, and it shows up in commercial rents and retail vacancies. Finally, let's separate two conversations that keep getting crossed. Long-term public safety versus short-term shows of force. The cities that are bending their violent crime curve, Chicago included this year, are doing it with targeted policing, gun case prosecutions, community violence work, better lighting and street design, and boring, steady coordination across agencies. None of that makes for a dramatic TV clip. Troops do. But safety is built in months and years, not news cycles. Bottom line, Chicago is the test case for how far a president can go in the name of order when the numbers and the locals say the crisis is easing, not exploding. Maybe this is a bluff that fizzles. Maybe it's a limited deployment that becomes background noise, or maybe it's the moment the Insurrection Act leaves the history books and enters daily life. If you care about security, taxes, and the kind of country your kids inherit, you have a stake in how this plays out. Thanks for watching Sharp Angle. Tell us in the comments, do you think sending the National Guard into cities like Chicago makes Americans safer, or just concentrates more power in Washington? Like and subscribe so more people can find independent, fact-based analysis that actually explains what this means for your life.